Okay, so here we are talking about a lesson in perspective. This lesson will be about using cinematography from classic films to illustrate how you can have an environment in perspective with an action happening within a sequence, within a one perspective shot, like the introduction of one character into an environment followed by another character into an environment. Okay, here on my lap board that I have leaning against my art table, I have two printouts of snapshots from the 1978 masterpiece Halloween by John Carpenter. In the first shot, we have Jamie Lee Curtis walking away from us down the sidewalk in one-point perspective. You can tell it's one point very clearly just by following the lines of the sidewalk as they go into the picture plane. And then into the foreground steps Michael Myers. Now, with how I'm going to break this down, you're going to see how you can tell how to introduce a character into an environment and have characters in scale by scaling the head first. So to begin, you first need to establish your picture frame. That is the format in which you are viewing. This could be a storyboard, this could be a comic book panel. In fact, there's very little difference between the two. But to start out with, we know we're going to have a horizontal view. This is a movie shot. So first, we have our picture frame by which we're viewing. And we have our environment laid out. The red lines indicate lines of perspective. The blue lines are elements of the environment like the grass, the sidewalk, the foliage of the trees, this fence going along the eye level, the eye line. And that's another thing to be very important to remember. That's another thing to remember also, is that there's a big difference between eye line and the horizon line. The horizon line is where the sky meets the ground. But very often you don't really get to see that. More often you get to see eye line. Your eye line is the eye level at which you are viewing things. So our eye level runs across the picture plane at this height. And then looking at our photo reference from the snapshot of Halloween, we see that, okay, this is where the ground plane begins. Our eye level is about the top of this fence that's running across, but you can't see the entire fence because there's trees, and then this is a street over here. This is the sidewalk coming towards us from the vanishing point that's over here. We have our lines of perspective off the car here, off the edge of the stoop of the other house, the roof of another house here. Here's another sidewalk receding into the picture plane. So now we have our eye level and we have our ground level. That's what we've established here along with the environment. Next, we introduce Laurie Strode, played by the lovely Jamie Lee Curtis. We put her here, looking at our reference from the shot that we took before that we showed earlier. And we can see that she's this height at this depth into the picture plane. Meaning, with our eye level here cutting across the picture plane and the ground level here at this depth into the picture, she is this tall and her head is this big. Now, picking any particular vanishing point on the horizon line, but I'll pick the vanishing point of the picture itself to keep things more unified. I'll take that vanishing point that we indicated that is right here with these lines vanishing off it, and I'll vanish these lines off her head so that if she was standing right here, That's how big her head would be. With her head in perspective. That's how big anyone's head who is as tall and proportionally built the same as her would be. Now, if standing next to her was a guy who was a bit taller than her, if you would scale them next to each other and say, okay, his head is this big, and he's this tall, and here's his body in perspective, right? You would just make another vanishing point on the horizon line, on the eye line, and vanish off his head. And again, that would give you the size of the head of an individual the same height as this figure and proportionally built the same. That's how you can draw a taller person in the distance and a shorter person in the foreground. As long as you have a basis of what the head will be of a figure that you choose to focus on, and you vanish everything off of that head, that gives you the head placement, which then gives you the body placement by scale. Because this is the height of a guy who's taller than her standing next to her. And this is his height standing over here. So feasibly you could have him here and you could have her here, and it would work. Even though he would be taller here and deeper into the picture plane, and she's shorter than him here, but closer in the foreground. Because it's scale. An important factor to always keep in mind in creating a convincing environment is to remember scale. You can have all the tables in a coffee shop lined up where they're all perpendicular to each other and vanishing towards a central vanishing point, and every single person is sitting straight in their chair with perfect posture, and every single rectangular plate is all vanishing with the tables towards that same vanishing point. And someone will look at it and they'll say, it looks good, but there's just something off about it. And they will not be able to articulate to you what it is that is off about it that is upsetting them, or not at least allowing them to truly enjoy your work. And that's usually what it is. What makes an environment convincing is, yes, following the laws of perspective, but it's also the variety in nature. Variety is the spice of nature. So you have to have your relationships depicted in such a way that you can tap into someone's mind and their memory of what you're depicting and create in them the suspense of disbelief to fall into your story. Example, when we create the environment here, I'm counting on your knowledge that you remember what a lawn looks like, what a sidewalk looks like, trees, a street, and a car from the 70s kind of looks like. It's not just following the laws of one-point perspective, but the relationship of the width of a sidewalk to somebody's lawn. You may not in your head know exactly how many feet and inches the width of a typical sidewalk is in suburban America, but you've seen it enough times that you do remember that. Well, if you weren't looking at photo reference from a movie, how would you recall to make this width? Go outside and sketch. Sketch in coffee shops. Sketch around the town that you live in. Sketch in restaurants. When you go out to the club, dance it with your girls. Sit in the corner and sketch people sitting at a bar. How do people sit on bar stools? How tall is a tall bar stool compared to the shorter bar stools, or compared to the chairs at the tables? That's another common thing. The height of the table proportionally to a person sitting in it, proportionally to someone standing next to it. It usually comes to about where your pelvis meets your femur. That's usually about the height of a table, depending on a restaurant. Or it may come down maybe a hand's length shorter than that, depending on where you are. But there's a certain grace that you have to operate in so that you can still function with the familiarity, that your viewer has. Your viewer has to know, okay, what a car looks like. So you're depicting and you're capturing their memory of what a car looks like. You're using the laws of perspective and scale to put this car here. But if you had someone standing in front of this car, typically it's about the height of a person, or maybe a head length taller than a car. I'm 5'9", depending on which bank I'm walking out of. And when I had a Nissan Sentra 2002, when I stood in front of it, it came to about my clavicle. I had like a full head height taller than it, I would say. So if I'm drawing someone standing in front of this car here, I can even then vanish off this head here with this vanishing point. And look, I can put somebody of the same comparable height of this figure, I can put them right here. I can put people anywhere that I want as long as I have a scaled relationship to vanish off of. Meaning something that your viewer will have a subconscious or unconscious recollection of the actual size of the object you're depicting in the real world. Meaning people in the Western world tend to have a certain memory of the height of a car and what someone standing in front of a car looks like. If the top of this car came to this figure's waist, you'd be like, damn, that's a tall dude. But no, it comes to his shoulders, so that's about an average height person. So, to tie it back to what we were doing before, we've got Laurie Strode here. She's walking into the picture plane, out deeper towards the vanishing point. And now that I have her head in perspective, I know Michael Myers is about 6'4". I would say Michael Myers is the height of Superman. He's as tall as Superman, and Christopher Reeve was 6'4". He's not, I don't like him when he's too big, like in the Rob Zombie movies, but he should have kind of an intimidating physique to him. So I take Laurie Strode's head, I vanish off it, and then I know Michael's head will come up a bit higher than hers, and I carry that across, and that gives me the size of his head in perspective in relation to hers, in scale to hers. So then when I drop him in, you see this is the back of the collar of his mechanic's outfit that he wears, and this is his sleeve, this is his back. And just seeing this much of the figure gives you an idea of how tall he is. Because your mind completes the comparison. Because you're relating the size and proportion of this figure in scale to this one. So you could have a smaller figure in perspective, and it would be following true 1 point perspective. Like if I vanished off this figure here, and I introduced him here, he would still be shorter than Michael Myers, even though he's in front of him. And even if I brought him out closer to the foreground, he would still be shorter than Michael Myers. And even though your viewer is only seeing this much of Michael Myers, not an entire figure shot, they'll unconsciously know this figure is not as tall as he should be in relation to this. So when you're creating this environment and you're creating characters in perspective, you're really having a conversation with your viewer. And that conversation begins with the relationships and scales of the elements in your environment. Your environment is its own character. Then the relationship of your central figure, or where you want the focus of the panel, if it's a comic book, or the shot if it's a storyboard or for a movie. The scale and relationship of this focused character, this focal point, to the environment and how you want everything to relate to it. So I hope this has been a helpful lesson in drawing figures in perspective and creating a convincing environment. My best advice to anyone who wants to advance in creating convincing environments for their characters or for their comic book storytelling, look to the greats: John Carpenter, Martin Scorsese, Francis Ford Coppola, classic directors, Stanley Kubrick. He's a fantastic master of one-point perspective. Look to their movies, study them, watch them 20 times each, and you'll learn cinematography and you'll learn how to be a better storyteller, and that will just resonate into your comic book work. Till next time.